Thank you. And I'm here representing a team. It looks really big, and I can tell you that our meetings are 7:30 on a Friday morning, so not all these people will attend all our meetings. But what this team is actually a really good representation of a number of the disciplines throughout the Burwood Spinal Unit, right from time of injury. There's a couple of our orthopaedic surgeons that do most of the surgical fixations of spinal cord injuries that get flown to Christchurch. There's also Rick and Raj, who are our rehabilitation consultants, as well as the multidisciplinary team, some physios, some nurses. And then Liz Oliver is our service manager. She usually holds the budget strings, so she's always useful to have at a meeting. As well as there's a couple of us that have dual roles, in that we are clinicians at the Burwood Spinal Unit, but we also have a strong interest in research. So there's some dual roles in there. Needless to say though, it's a rather outspoken meeting some of the time. Funding for our project has come from a number of areas, and a number of people have worked really hard to get us funding for this project. First of all is the Spinal Research and Education Trust Fund, Canterbury Orthopaedic Services, Accident Compensation Corporation, and Mentronic have all donated monies to assist with this project. Before we start, we've talked a lot about registries today, and what we need to know is what is a registry. We've had this philosophical discussion in our department over whether it's a registry or a register. I don't think we've got the answer to that, but we'll call it a registry today. But it's an organised system that uses observational study methods to collect uniform data, clinical and other, to evaluate specified outcomes for a population. So for us it's a spinal cord impairment population. Now we have to be really careful. We want all people that have a spinal cord impairment in our register. It's not just a spinal cord injury register, because a lot of our people that come into both spinal units have an impairment, they don't have an injury. But why do we need one? Like you've heard both the topics before me have talked about. Sarah's topic has been one of the first in New Zealand that's actually tried to quantify how many spinal cord injuries there are in New Zealand. We don't even have that data. We can't even tell you how many people were injured last year or how many people are sitting around ageing with spinal cord injury. We need to know this, but that's on a research basis. But we also need to know what's happening in our spinal cord injury rehab units. It feels like we're getting busier. It feels like we're dealing with a different population than we were dealing with 20 years ago. It feels like their needs are different, but we don't know because no one's actually put it down on paper. So we want a centralised, comprehensive data set on people with spinal cord impairment, and it provides us with longitudinal information on the outcomes which are essential for our understanding of spinal cord impairment and evaluating our own effectiveness. My friend Albert Einstein said that to raise new questions, new possibilities, and regard old problems from a new angle requires creative imagination and marks a real advance in science. If he's alive today, he would have said, or a spinal cord injury registry. There's been lots of registries happen around the world, and lots of money have been thrown into lots of registries, and they've failed. A friend of mine from Sweden, there was a Nordic spinal cord injury registry that they were entering data on every active range of motion of the upper limb in this registry, and they did it for a number of years before this registry failed. So before we start on looking at a registry for New Zealand, we need to figure out why they failed in the past. They mostly fail because the burden of collecting the data can easily outweigh the data's usefulness. So if it's taking you 2 hours to look at the data, but no one wants to know what the specific range of motion of a joint is, why are we putting it in there? They can be expensive to develop and operate. If we have to have people that are going to enter the data over and above clinicians, then it's going to cost money, and who ultimately is going to pay for that? New Zealand's a really small country and we have a small number of people, but we also can't afford this ongoing data collection cost. And once again, probably one of the biggest difficulties is that access to the data once it is entered is limited or difficult. So it's really difficult, like who owns the data? A prime example close to home is our spin data system, which has lots of information in, but it's very difficult to get it out again. So we need to know why these fail. From our colleagues overseas, they've also told us that it's important to decide what we want to collect before we collect it. So there's no point collecting lots and lots of data points if you only need one. And then there are people sitting around the world. So we need to figure out what we're going to look at in our spinal cord injury registry. I mean, I'm sure McDreamy is sitting there wondering how many people are living with spinal cord injury impairment in New Zealand. I know I am. And then other people have other questions. Are people who sustain an acute spinal cord impairment getting older? How do our length of stays and outcomes compare to other spinal units worldwide? And does time from accident to surgery make a difference in outcome? Then we have some clinical questions. Does the DVT prophylaxis treatment we currently use work? And some of these have been answered today, but are there differences in outcomes between ACC and non-ACC clients with a spinal cord impairment? So we've looked around, and while our research wasn't comprehensive, we did have existing relationships with developers of 2 registries, both in the English language, which is always useful. The Victorian Spinal Cord Injury Registry is developed in Australia, and it's pretty new. It was developed in 2013, and data entry commenced in Victoria this year. It's Australian based, but we won't hold it against them. And the good things is that it incorporates the ICF core sets, which is a basic set of data that the World Health Organization has told us we need to include when we're looking at anything to do with spinal cord impairment. And it also incorporates AROC, which is the Australasian Rehab Outcomes that we already collect for our unit and compare it with Australia. And that the advantage of it is that it is able to be adapted to New Zealand specific data requirements because we do have that existing relationship. There's also a much larger one in Canada called the Rick Henson Spinal Cord Injury Registry. This was developed in 2004 and it already has international sites in Israel, China and Australia. Again, we are able to adapt it to New Zealand specific data requirements. So we have these 2 registries, but we're unsure about what is going to give us the best amount of information and what's going to make it easier for us. So let me introduce our project. The aim of the project is that we want to conduct an evaluation of the utility and feasibility, or the usefulness, of these 2 registries, the Rick Henson Spinal Cord Injury Registry and the Victorian Spinal Injury Database, to provide demographic data on people who sustain a spinal cord impairment in New Zealand. One of the biggest things as a clinician working in the spinal unit is that we don't want to make this additional work for our clinical staff, and it needs to be clinically relevant. But we also want it to show longitudinal data so that it provides us with standardised information for reports, service delivery, and to make sure that we continue with our clinical excellence. And what we ultimately want to do is provide data to answer our New Zealand specific questions. So these are our key milestones. We've been working really hard to finalise our project proposal. We've just got our ethics letter back. We've appointed a coordinator for the pilot project, which is to look at the usefulness of these 2 registries to try and give us some information which one or both are going to be most useful in our data collection. We've got the funding, and we're due to tee off, as we say, in May, 1st of May, looking at all the spinal cord impairments admitted to the Burwood Spinal Unit from the 1st of January to the 31st of December this year. And you can see from there that we've got some other timelines to work to. So it's very much in its infancy, but we are still at the moment developing our data points and our clinical questions. So anyone that has any input or anything that they would like to add to the clinical questions, this is a really good forum to discuss it.